Daniel Rahman had always considered himself the king of his house. He worked, he paid the bills, and in his mind that meant things should run his way. His wife, Aisha, disagreed silently for years until the day she finally didn't. It began on a Sunday afternoon. Daniel walked into the living room, tossing his keys onto the table. Aisha. Tea, he called, dropping onto the sofa without even looking around. No answer. He frowned. Aisha? She appeared in the doorway, arms folded, expression calm but unusually serious. Make it yourself. Daniel blinked. What? I said, make it yourself. He laughed, thinking she was joking. Very funny. I'm tired. And I'm not, she replied quietly. Something in her voice made him sit up. This wasn't a joke. I cook, I clean, I wash, I iron, I do everything, she continued. You come home, sit, eat, sleep, repeat. This is not a marriage, Daniel. This is a job. Daniel rolled his eyes. Here we go again. No, she said firmly. Not again. This time it ends. He frowned. What ends? This. She gestured around the house. Me being your maid. Daniel smirked. You're my wife. It's different. Aisha looked straight into his eyes. Then prove it. He crossed his arms. How? She paused for a moment, then said something that would change his life completely. You will run this house for 1 month. Cooking, cleaning, laundry, everything. Daniel laughed loudly. Impossible. I have work. I also have work, she replied calmly. Starting tomorrow, I'm taking a break. You'll handle the house. He shook his head. No chance. She walked closer, her voice soft but dangerous. If you don't, I'm going to my parents' house for a month. You can live alone and do everything yourself anyway. Daniel opened his mouth, then closed it again. He knew she was serious this time. Fine, he muttered. I'll manage. Aisha smiled slightly. Good. Then we start tomorrow. The next morning. Daniel stood in the kitchen staring at a frying pan like it was a bomb. How hard can cooking eggs be, he muttered. 10 minutes later, smoke filled the kitchen, the eggs were burnt, and he was coughing while waving a towel at the smoke alarm. Aisha walked in, looked at the pan, then at him. Breakfast, she asked innocently. He glared at her. This is sabotage. She smiled. This is cooking. The uniform. By afternoon, Daniel had washed dishes, burned lunch, spilled detergent on the floor, and mixed white clothes with colored laundry, turning his shirt slightly pink. He was exhausted. Aisha walked in holding something folded in her hands. What's that? He asked suspiciously. If you're going to be the maid of the house, she said calmly, you should dress like one. It will protect your clothes while cleaning. He laughed. Very funny. She unfolded the outfit. It was a black maid dress with a white apron. Daniel stopped laughing. You're joking. I'm not. I'm not wearing that. She shrugged. Then I guess I'm going to my parents' house. He stared at the dress. Then at the pile of dishes. Then at the laundry basket. Then back at her. This is blackmail, he said. This is equality, she replied. He picked up the dress slowly. Just for cleaning, he muttered. Of course, she said, hiding a small smile. The first time. An hour later, Daniel stood in the bedroom wearing the maid outfit, staring at himself in the mirror. The dress reached his knees. The apron was tied behind his back. He felt ridiculous, embarrassed, and strangely nervous. This is insane, he muttered. Aisha knocked on the door. Maid? The floor isn't going to mop itself. He closed his eyes in frustration, then opened the door and walked out. Aisha looked at him, then nodded seriously. Good. Now start with the living room. He grabbed the mop angrily and started cleaning. But as he worked, mopping floors, dusting shelves, washing dishes, something unexpected began to happen. For the first time, he realized how much work it actually took to run the house. By evening, his back hurt, his feet hurt, and he was exhausted. Aisha sat on the sofa drinking tea, the tea he had made. He placed the cup on the table and said quietly, "Anything else, madam?" She looked up at him, surprised by his tone. "Yes," she said slowly. "Iron the clothes after dinner." He nodded and walked away. Aisha watched him go, then smiled slightly. But Daniel didn't see her expression. He didn't know that this was only the beginning. Because later that night, Aisha opened her wardrobe, took out something else, and whispered to herself, "If he thinks the maid dress is the end, he has no idea what comes next." Daniel woke up the next morning with aching legs and a sore back. He groaned as he sat up, the memory of yesterday rushing back into his mind, the cleaning, the cooking, the laundry, and the maid outfit. He looked at the chair where the dress was folded neatly. "Never again," he muttered. From the kitchen, Aisha called, "Maid. Breakfast." He closed his eyes. This is my life now. The schedule. When Daniel entered the kitchen, Aisha handed him a piece of paper. "What's this?" he asked. "Your daily schedule," she replied calmly. He looked at the paper. Daniel's maid duties. 7 o'clock, wake up 7:30, prepare breakfast 8:30, wash dishes 9:00, laundry 11:00, clean house 1:00, prepare lunch 3:00, iron clothes 5:00, tea 7:00, prepare dinner 9:00, kitchen cleaning. He stared at the paper in disbelief. This is a full-time job. Aisha sipped her tea. Yes. Now you understand. He sighed. Fine. I'll do it. She looked at him carefully. Uniform first. He froze. You're serious? Yes. He muttered under his breath, but went back to the bedroom and changed into the maid outfit again. This time, it felt slightly less shocking, but still very embarrassing. When he came back, Aisha inspected him like a strict manager. A proper maid keeps things neat, she said, fixing the apron ribbon at his back. And you need to learn discipline. Daniel raised an eyebrow. Discipline? She smiled slightly. New house rules. The rules. She handed him another paper. House rules for the maid. You must respond with a yes, madam. No arguing, all work must be completed before resting, you must wear the uniform while working. If you make mistakes, there will be extra duties. Daniel looked up slowly. You're enjoying this too much. She smiled innocently. Maybe. He sighed. Yes. Madam. She raised an eyebrow. Good. You're learning. The first lesson. Later that day, Daniel was ironing clothes when he accidentally burned one of Aisha's scarves. Aisha, he called nervously. She came in, looked at the scarf, then at him. You burned it. It was an accident. She nodded slowly. Mistakes have consequences. He narrowed his eyes. What consequences? She thought for a moment, then said calmly. Tomorrow, you will do all the work, and wear the full maid uniform all day. Including the headband. He stared at her. Headband? Yes. This is getting ridiculous. She crossed her arms. Rule number 2? He sighed. No arguing. And how do you respond? She asked. He looked at the floor. Yes, madam. Something changes. Over the next few days, Daniel cooked, cleaned, washed clothes, ironed, swept floors, and served tea every evening. At first he was angry. Then he was embarrassed. Then he was tired. But slowly, something changed. He began to notice small things. How long dishes actually take, how tiring laundry is, how annoying ironing can be, how much planning cooking requires. One evening, he placed tea in front of Aisha and said quietly, "You do this every day?" She nodded. He sat down slowly. "I didn't realize it was this much work." She looked at him carefully but didn't say anything. After a moment, he stood up again. "I'll start dinner, madam." She watched him walk to the kitchen, still wearing the maid dress and apron, moving more naturally now than before. She smiled slightly. But Daniel didn't see her expression. He didn't know she had already planned the next step. Because that night, she placed a shopping bag on the bed. Inside the bag were another maid dress, white stockings, soft house slippers, and something else he definitely wasn't expecting. When Daniel came into the room and opened the bag, his eyes widened. "You can't be serious." From behind him, Aisha said quietly, "Oh, I'm very serious." Daniel slowly lifted the last item from the shopping bag and stared at it in disbelief. It was a wig. He turned around very slowly. "Aisha, no." She crossed her arms calmly. "Yes. This is too much. You agreed to the rules." "I agreed to cleaning, not this." She walked closer. "You are not being punished, Daniel. You are learning. When you look different, you behave differently. You become more careful, more patient, more aware." He shook his head. "This is insane." She pointed at the schedule on the wall. "Rule number 2? He sighed deeply. "No arguing." "And?" He looked down. "Yes, madam." The new uniform. An hour later, Daniel stood in front of the mirror again. This time he was wearing the black maid dress, white apron, white stockings, house slippers, maid headband, and the wig. He barely recognized himself. "This is humiliating," he muttered. From outside the room, Aisha called, "Maid. The living room isn't clean." He closed his eyes for a moment, then opened the door and walked out slowly. Aisha looked at him from head to toe, then nodded. "Good. Now you look like a proper maid." He sighed. "What do you want me to do?" She sat on the sofa and handed him a duster. "Start cleaning. And remember the rules." He began dusting shelves, tables, and the TV stand. The wig kept falling into his eyes, and the apron ribbon kept loosening. Everything felt awkward and uncomfortable. But after an hour, he stopped noticing the clothes and just focused on the work. Clean the table. Sweep the floor. Wash dishes. Fold laundry. Iron clothes. Make tea. Work after work after work. By evening, he was exhausted again. The first slip. That night during dinner, Daniel accidentally dropped a spoon on the floor. He bent down quickly to pick it up and said automatically, "Sorry, madam." He froze. Aisha looked at him slowly. "You said that very naturally." He looked embarrassed. "I didn't mean to." She smiled slightly. "But you did." He didn't know why, but that made him feel strangely quiet. The realization. A few days later, Daniel was kneeling on the floor cleaning a stain from the carpet when he suddenly stopped moving. He looked around the house. Everything was clean. The dishes were done. Laundry folded. Food prepared. Tea ready. He had done everything. He sat back slowly and whispered to himself. She did all this, every day, alone. For the first time, he didn't feel angry about the maid outfit. He felt ashamed. That evening, he brought tea to Aisha and placed it gently in front of her. "Tea, madam," he said quietly. She looked at him. "You sound different." He hesitated, then said softly, "I'm sorry." She didn't respond immediately. "For what?" she asked. "For everything," he said. "For not helping. For treating you like this was easy. For acting like I was the king of the house." She watched him carefully. He looked down. This house runs because of you. I didn't see it before. Aisha didn't smile this time. She just nodded slowly. Good, she said. Then tomorrow, we begin the final lesson. He looked up. Final lesson? She stood up and walked toward the bedroom. Yes, she said calmly. If you have learned humility, now you must learn responsibility. He stood there in his maid dress, confused and nervous. What does that mean? He asked. She turned around at the bedroom door and said. Tomorrow, the guests are coming. And you will serve them, as the maid of the house. Daniel's eyes widened. Guests? What guests? She smiled slightly. My friends. Daniel did not sleep much that night. He lay in bed staring at the ceiling while Aisha slept peacefully beside him. Every few minutes he turned and looked at the chair where the maid uniform was neatly folded, dress, apron, stockings, headband, wig. Guests. Her friends. He covered his face with his hands. This is a disaster. From beside him, Aisha spoke without opening her eyes. Sleep. Tomorrow is a busy day for the maid. He groaned quietly. Morning orders. At 7 a.m. sharp, Aisha clapped her hands once. Wake up, maid. Big day today. Daniel slowly sat up. I'm really doing this, aren't I? Yes, she replied. And everything must be perfect. She handed him a long list. Guest preparation list. Clean living room, clean guest bathroom, prepare snacks, prepare tea, iron tablecloth, arrange cushions, mop floors, wash dishes, change curtains, set tea table. Daniel looked at the list. This is impossible for one person. Aisha smiled. Welcome to my life. He sighed. Yes, madam. Full uniform. After breakfast, she pointed toward the bedroom. Uniform. He changed slowly, putting on everything again. This time it took him less time. He tied the apron better, adjusted the wig properly, and fixed the headband without help. When he came out, Aisha noticed immediately. You're getting used to it, she said. He didn't argue this time. I just want to finish the work properly. She nodded. Good maid. The work never ends. The next few hours were exhausting. Daniel vacuumed carpets, washed the guest bathroom, cleaned mirrors, ironed tablecloths, cut snacks, boiled tea, arranged cups, mopped floors again, folded napkins, arranged cushions perfectly. Every time he finished one task, Aisha gave him another. Maid, the table is dusty. Maid, the cups are not aligned. Maid, mop again. Maid, bring water. Maid, iron this. By afternoon, his feet hurt badly. He stood in the kitchen holding the counter and whispered to himself. How did she do this every day? For the first time, he felt not just tired, but respect. The doorbell. At 5 p.m., the doorbell rang. Daniel froze in the kitchen. Aisha looked at him calmly. Positions. He swallowed. I really have to serve them? Yes. He adjusted the apron slowly and picked up the tray with teacups. His hands were slightly shaking. Aisha opened the door. 3 women entered the house, laughing and talking. Aisha. It's been so long. Your house looks beautiful. They walked into the living room and sat down. One of them asked, where did you find such a clean house? Do you have a maid? Aisha smiled slightly. Yes. I do. Daniel almost dropped the tray in the kitchen. The introduction. Aisha walked to the kitchen door and called. Maid, bring the tea. Daniel took a deep breath, picked up the tray, and walked slowly into the living room. He kept his head slightly down and began serving tea one by one. The women looked at him briefly, then continued talking. Very neat maid, one of them said. Yes, very quiet, another said. You're lucky, Aisha, the third one added. Daniel felt his face burning with embarrassment, but he kept serving tea carefully. Then one of the women said, "What's your maid's name?" Daniel froze. Aisha looked at him for a moment, then answered. "Her name is Danny." Daniel almost choked. "Danny, bring the snacks," Aisha said calmly. He nodded quietly. "Yes, madam." The long evening. For the next 2 hours, Daniel served tea, served snacks, collected empty cups, brought water, cleaned plates, stood quietly near the wall waiting for orders. The women kept talking, laughing, telling stories, completely unaware of the situation. At one point, one of them said, "Danny, you are very well trained. You work very nicely." Daniel didn't know what to say, so he just replied softly, "Thank you, madam." Aisha watched him the entire evening but said nothing. But she noticed something important. He was no longer angry. No longer arguing. No longer embarrassed the same way. He was careful. Quiet. Responsible. Respectful. He had changed. After the guests left. When the guests finally left, Daniel closed the door and leaned against it, exhausted. "I think I worked more today than in my entire office career," he said. Aisha laughed for the first time in days. "Now you understand." He nodded slowly. "Yes. I really do." He walked to the kitchen, started collecting cups, and washing dishes without being told. Aisha watched him quietly. After a few minutes, he said something she didn't expect. "Aisha?" "Yes?" If I stop being the maid after this month, I'm still going to help you in the house." She looked surprised. "Really?" He nodded. "This work is not easy. I was wrong." She smiled softly. That was the final lesson. He turned around. "Final lesson?" "Yes," she said. "Humility, respect, and responsibility." He looked down at the maid dress he was still wearing. "So? I'm not the maid anymore?" he asked. She walked closer and adjusted his apron gently. "That," she said softly, "depends on how well you behave from now on." He looked at her, unsure if she was joking or serious. She smiled slightly. "Now, Maid Danny, the kitchen is still dirty." He sighed, but then smiled a little. "Yes, madam." After the night of the guests, Daniel expected everything to go back to normal. It didn't. The next morning, he woke up automatically at 7 a.m. without an alarm. For a few seconds he lay there confused, then suddenly sat up. "Breakfast," he muttered. He walked to the kitchen, started boiling water for tea, took out eggs, bread, and began preparing breakfast without even thinking about it. Halfway through cooking, he suddenly froze. "I'm doing it again." From behind him, Aisha leaned against the kitchen door, watching quietly. "You woke up early," she said. He shrugged slightly. "I just did." She walked in and sat at the table while he placed tea in front of her. "Tea, madam," he said automatically, then paused. "I mean, Aisha." She smiled. "You can still call me madam sometimes." He shook his head but smiled slightly. "The habit forms." Over the next week, something strange happened. Daniel continued doing housework even though Aisha didn't force him anymore. He cooked breakfast, washed dishes, did laundry, ironed clothes, cleaned floors, made evening tea, helped with dinner, organized the kitchen. Sometimes he wore normal clothes. Sometimes Aisha told him to wear the maid outfit, to protect clothes while cleaning. And surprisingly, he didn't argue much anymore. One evening while ironing clothes, he said quietly, "This house feels different when it's clean." Aisha looked at him. "Yes. It does. I never noticed before," he admitted. The conversation. That night they sat together after dinner, something they hadn't done peacefully in a long time. Daniel spoke first. "I think I understand what you were trying to teach me." She didn't respond immediately. What did you learn? He thought for a moment. I learned that working outside is not the only work. I learned that housework never ends. I learned that I was acting like a king in a house where you were doing everything alone. And I learned I was wrong. Aisha looked at him quietly. He continued. When I first wore that maid dress, I felt humiliated. Angry. Embarrassed. But after working every day, I stopped thinking about the dress and started thinking about the work. Then I stopped thinking about the work and started thinking about you. She said softly, and what did you think about me? He looked at her seriously. I thought, you are the hardest working person in this house. And I never even said thank you. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then he said quietly. Thank you, Aisha. She smiled gently. You're welcome, Daniel. The unexpected request. A few days later, Aisha came home from shopping and placed another bag on the bed. Daniel looked at it suspiciously. What's in the bag? Open it, she said. He opened it slowly. Inside were a new maid dress, blue this time, a better apron, new house slippers, cleaning gloves, a small notebook. He looked up slowly. Why is there a notebook? She smiled. That is the house management book. He blinked. House management? Yes, she said. If you are going to help run the house, you must learn planning too. She opened the notebook and showed him sections. House management book. Grocery list, monthly expenses, cleaning, schedule, laundry, schedule, repair, list, guest planning, meal planning. Daniel looked impressed. You planned everything like this? She nodded. For years. He sat down slowly. I really had no idea. She handed him a pen. Now you will help manage it. The big test. A week later, Aisha told him something unexpected. I'm going to visit my parents for 3 days. Daniel looked up quickly. 3 days? You're leaving me alone? She nodded. Yes. He asked nervously, and the house? She smiled. You are the maid. You are the manager. You are the cook. You are everything. He sighed. This is a test, isn't it? She smiled. Yes. Alone in the house. For 3 days, Daniel did everything alone. Woke up early, cooked meals, washed dishes, cleaned house, did laundry, bought groceries, paid electricity bill, fixed a leaking tap, ironed clothes, managed expenses, cleaned the fridge, organized shelves. The first day was chaos. The second day was difficult. The third day was smooth. By the time Aisha came back, the house was perfectly clean, food was ready, laundry folded, and expenses written in the notebook. She walked into the house and looked around slowly. Everything is clean, she said. Daniel came from the kitchen wearing the blue maid apron, holding a spoon. Welcome home, madam, he said with a small smile. She looked at him, really looked at him, and realized something important. He wasn't pretending anymore. He wasn't forced anymore. He had actually changed. The decision. That night, they sat together again. Aisha asked. So, Daniel, are you still the king of the house? He shook his head. No. Then what are you? He smiled slightly. I'm the husband, and part-time maid. She laughed. He continued. No, seriously. From now on, we both run this house together. No king, no maid. Just partners. She nodded slowly. But then she said something unexpected. Sometimes? I might still call you Maid Danny. He sighed and smiled at the same time. I know. She stood up and said. Maid Danny, turn off the kitchen lights before sleeping. He shook his head, smiling. Yes, madam. But as he walked toward the kitchen, he didn't feel humiliated anymore. He felt responsible. He felt respectful. He felt different. But he didn't know that Aisha still had one last surprise for him. Because the next morning, she handed him an envelope labeled Final Lesson. He looked at her nervously. What is this? She smiled mysteriously. Open it tomorrow morning. Daniel stared at the envelope for a long time that night. It was a simple white envelope with a final lesson written on it in neat handwriting. He turned it over in his hands several times, trying to guess what was inside. Aisha noticed but said nothing. She just smiled slightly and continued reading her book. You're not going to tell me what this is, he asked. No, she replied calmly. You open it tomorrow morning. He sighed. I'm nervous. You should be, she said, smiling. The envelope. The next morning, Daniel woke up early again. The envelope was on the table. He made tea first, out of habit now, then sat down and opened it carefully. Inside were three things. A folded letter, a small house key of printed paper. He opened the letter first. It read, Daniel. When we got married, I thought we would build a life together. But slowly, I became the maid and you became the king. I was tired, not just from work, but from feeling alone in our own house. So I decided to teach you something, not to humiliate you, not to punish you, but to make you understand. Over this past month, you learned how to cook, how to clean, how to manage a house, how much work it really is, and most importantly, respect. This is the final lesson. A house is not run by a king or a maid. A house is run by partners. I don't want a maid. I don't want a king. I want a husband who stands beside me. If you understand this, then the lesson is complete. Aisha. Daniel read the letter slowly, then read it again. He didn't speak for a long time. The key. He picked up the small key next. What's this? He asked. Aisha sat down across from him. This, she said, is the key to the storage room downstairs. Why do I need that? She smiled. Because inside is everything you used this month, cleaning supplies, extra kitchen tools, house documents, bills, repair tools, everything. From now on, you will help manage the house with me. He nodded slowly. Partner, he said quietly. Yes, she replied. The printed paper. He opened the last paper. At the top it said, House Partnership Agreement. Below it was written, From today. We both cook, we both clean, we both do laundry, we both manage expenses, we both make decisions, we both respect each other's work. No one is king, no one is servant, we are partners. At the bottom were two lines. Signature __________________________________________________________________________________________________________________________:_. A pen was clipped to the paper. Daniel looked up at her. You're serious? He asked. Yes, she said. He picked up the pen and signed his name slowly. Then he handed the pen to her, and she signed too. They looked at the paper together and smiled. The maid dress. Later that day, Daniel opened the wardrobe and looked at the maid dresses hanging there, the black one and the blue one. Aisha walked in and stood beside him. So, she asked, what should we do with these? He thought for a moment, then said something surprising. Keep them. She raised an eyebrow. Why? He smiled slightly. To remind me of the month I stopped being a king and started being a husband. She smiled. Then she said jokingly. Also, sometimes the maid still has work to do. He laughed. I knew it. 1 month later. 1 month later, their house was different. Not because of furniture. Not because of money. But because of how they lived. Sometimes Aisha cooked while Daniel washed dishes. Sometimes Daniel cooked while Aisha folded laundry. They cleaned together, planned together, shopped together. And sometimes, when Daniel was cleaning, Aisha would walk past and say playfully, Maid Danny, don't forget the corners. And he would reply with a smile. Yes, madam. But now it was a joke. Because he was no longer the king. And he was no longer the maid. He was something much better. He was a husband who finally understood. The end.